My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you pardon for my sins and the grace to make these moments of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. If I look back at history, over the history of the last 2,000 years, I find myself wishing that more people had listened to you, Jesus. Obviously, I wish people had listened to you in every conceivable way, and for that matter, I wish that I had listened to you in every conceivable way. But listening to your words today leads me to contemplate the havoc that has been wrought in history by those false prophets who promise to lead people into righteousness, but just drag them down into rottenness. You will know them by their fruits, you said. And in history, we certainly have known them by their fruits. We can look back and see a lot of rotten fruit, a lot of thorns, a lot of wolves preying on the innocent. So your words seem too easily seen in history, but I suppose the difficult thing is seeing those things in the present. These words are still relevant, perhaps more relevant than ever nowadays in our culture. Beware of false prophets who come to you disguised as sheep, but underneath are ravenous wolves. You will be able to tell them by their fruits. Can people pick grapes from thorns or figs from thistles? In the same way, a sound tree produces good fruit, but a rotten tree, bad fruit. A sound tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor a rotten tree bear good fruit. Any tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown on the fire. I repeat, you will be able to tell them by their fruits. To be fair, Lord, I think we see a lot of stuff that seems like it should be good, producing, instead, a lot of bad fruit. Like, for example, the oligarchs of political correctness, who hail the mantra of tolerance and love to convince the world that we ought to accept absolutely anything until someone dares to disagree. And then the cancel culture shows that the realm of political correctness is not tolerant at all. Well, we know that well enough. We know the way it happens on a big scale, like a societal scale, but at an individual level, it's more difficult to perceive. I'll be honest with you. Most of the time, when it comes to individuals, people I've actually met and spent time with, people I've got to know, it's not that people want to lead others away from goodness, at least not at first, but rather that a poor person has simply fallen away. Basically, they got led astray by some wolf in sheep's clothing and find themselves fallen, feeling broken, or even rotten. Even more crazy is that on the inside, when they open up that heart that so often they feel is bad, it's nothing more than wounded. A good heart just aching for healing. The poor thing just got led astray by some wolf in sheep's clothing and fell, and no one stopped to pick them up. Let's be honest, we could say that as regards falling away, the gravitational pull of nowadays is a lot stronger than in the past. It's actually strangely hard for the human being to stay upright. Our posture might be perfect, but it's hard for a person's conduct to equal it. That gravitational pull of a societal momentum pulling itself back in history pulls our fallen human nature into prehistoric times. And even the best of things aren't very satisfying when things have gone bad. A few years ago, I had the not very burdensome obligation of going to Fiji to help out with a service project there. We went to a relatively isolated community on an island a few hours by boat from where we arrived. Well, that village was full of amazingly beautiful and joyful people. But not only that, it was full, and I mean full, of mango trees. Now, everyone should be aware that mangoes are the most heavenly fruit to be found on earth. No joke. I think that my heaven is going to be laden with mangoes, with their perfect fleshy pulp that seems more delectable than anything made by mankind. And there, in that village, there were mangoes absolutely everywhere. There was, in fact, one particularly enormous mango tree near the mission church stationed alongside the village. It was so big that if you wanted to eat a mango, you just had to go there and wait in front of it for a few minutes, and one would fall down. And if you couldn't be bothered waiting, you just needed to throw something at the tree, and you'd be sure to knock down at least one, if not several. The problem was, there were too many mangoes. Now, if you're like me, that seems like an inconceivable proposition, but it was true. It was actually impossible to eat them all, and so they would just drop and remain there, uneaten, on the ground. Tragic, really. But a mango doesn't just stay there and disappear overnight. It starts to decompose. And then you discover that even the most heavenly fruit, if it starts to rot, can become quite hellish. I won't go into the details about the stench of rotting mangoes, but you can imagine, and that's probably enough. When the fruit is cut off from the source of its life, it starts to decompose. Without the tree, the fruit can't live, and that's pretty much exactly what happens to people when they fall away from you, Lord. And the poor things, they feel it too. In the spiritual life, to keep healthy, we keep growing. But a person's not a fruit, and when a person falls away, they tend to cut themselves off, and we find that one of two things takes place. Either they cut themselves off, at least emotionally, from the people who remain close to God, or they try to take those people with them into vice. Poor souls. We're not talking about mangoes here. When a person feels that they're going bad, they're never in a happy state. It leads to all sorts of bad emotions and difficult struggles. Self-doubt and self-loathing, anger, which all too easily leads to hatred. But the great predicament is not actually that state, but that the person begins to lose hope, is convinced that God doesn't love them or can't, and they have no way back. They haven't discovered the difficult truth that struggling is not the same thing as falling, even though we use those verbs interchangeably in spiritual things all the time. And when you find your heart and mind immersed in the cancel culture rather than in the mercy of God, it seems like getting it wrong is going to get you cancelled by God himself. And the conclusion is not a particularly edifying self-perception. What do souls need to help them back? Lord, you know I would love to know the words or the actions that would convince such a person that it's okay to come home. But sometimes people aren't ready to listen, or their ears are a little bit blocked by the stuff they have around them. A few too many of those ravenous wolves dressed up in sheep's clothing, convincing them that really they're doing the right thing. And that leaves us with just three things: patience, prayer, and compassion. It's really healthy to pray for the people around us who seem to have fallen away from God. Chances are that inside that person is a heart who just needs someone who believes in them. Heaven knows I've counted too many examples of that myself. Lord, help us to follow your example in our approach to those souls you have put at our side. Help us to discover their goodness and be there for them when they need us. In reality, when they need you, Lord. And help us also to have the strength not to give in to that gravitational pull that leads a person to fall away in the first place. Our Mother Mary, teach us to love souls with the same compassion that you must have felt time and again, as you saw so many people who did not feel themselves worthy to come close to your Son. And help us to stay so close to him that we can help connect the two, and at the same time, never fall away ourselves. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations which you have communicated to me in this time of prayer. I ask your assistance in putting them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.